Africa is not missing strategies. What it misses is the alignment of strategies across key markets. We're going to explore this topic to see if we had to align all our strategies, would we be able to then grow and sustainably so for the future? Please help me welcome back to stage Wayne Godwin and his panelist. A round of applause, please. Thank you. Thank you.
It's fantastic to be back on stage and following, I guess, two real stalwarts of the conservation sector in Africa, and I think such an important conversation and segue into my next discussion, which is how to align tourism strategies across key African markets for sustainable growth. And I think it's interesting that this is becoming more of a discussion around over-tourism versus the right amount of tourism. We need the investment, etc. This is a global topic, and I think as Africa, we're going to start to see the benefit of a lot of over-tourism in other parts of the world coming down into Africa. And I'm delighted to be joined by Guy Hutchison, who's the president of Middle East and Africa for Hilton, on this topic. And Guy, welcome back to where it all began, right? And it's a career that has seen you spend a lot of time across Asia, the Middle East, Australia, and now, I guess professionally at least, sort of Africa as well. Excited?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, delighted to be back here. And my roots. I have some roots here, and
exactly.
So it's really exciting to be back, and it's great to see the level of activity that we're seeing, develop across the continent. And we're now at about 160 plus hotels across the continent, tripling our portfolio, 13 brands. So it's really amazing to see that momentum come into Africa. But equally, we're extremely conscious that we're at the beginning of the journey, and there's considerable untapped potential still to be developed.
Absolutely. And I think if you can maybe just reflect on that sort of career and journey across a number of kind of emerging markets and seeing the role of tourism has sort of played in developing these economies, and what are some of the sort of key learnings that you've picked up along the way that Africa can adopt from a sort of global emerging market best practice?
Yeah, big question. And I think if you recall that the data that Philip flashed up this morning from STR. It's no surprise that the destinations that are posting the best numbers in terms of occupancy rate, RevPAR, those equate 100% to those countries where there's a national strategy to develop tourism as a part of GDP, and where there are the strongest public-private sector partnerships. UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Morocco. And again, then it's also no surprise to see that these are also the hotbeds of development where investors are engaging
absolutely
and driving the growth in the industry. So it speaks to how fundamental that public-private sector partnership is in growing the business, but not only growing the business, but creating a structure or format that works for investors. And hospitality for me, it's probably globally one of the most unrecognized forces for social change. And this is the opportunity to a degree I think gets missed. When you have like a national capital here that runs sub 50% occupancy, sub $100 average rate, it's not surprising that it's difficult for investors to either engage in new build or renovate. And there's or where you're charging $340 for a visa. Equally, these are not incentives to invest. And the jurisdictions that have done this so well are where they've made that process. They've invested in structure, support, incentivized. They've seeded the business through permit processes, application processes, legal framework, ability to repatriate funds, the ability for people to invest, incentives for people to invest certain sectors. And that's where it unlocks that value, that social value for the hospitality industry. And I think Saudi Arabia, although Dubai is often an example that's held up, and it's a phenomenal example, Saudi Arabia is a very interesting one for me, We have a pipeline of 100 hotels currently under construction today in Saudi Arabia. That's, in our world, close to 40,000 jobs for Saudi nationals. Saudi Arabia has one of the youngest populations on earth, 65% are under the age of 30. Extrapolate that 40,000 jobs that are creating through our brands and what we're developing there across the other hotel chains, across airlines, all the infrastructure, airports, tour operators that goes in the hospitality space. That's unlocked massive social change for that population.
And from an Africa perspective, of course, we've got this huge growing urbanizing youth population, right? So quite similar to Saudi in that respect. And I guess that's sort of part of the key question is how do we turn that sort of emerging cohort of youth into travelers? That domestically and regionally versus relying on the sort of longer haul global sort of travel as well, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely fundamental, and we are seeing a little bit of that diversification. I think what's interesting, you're seeing that and it's not just an African issue. That's a global issue. We're seeing this 40% bulge in sort of emerging middle class, and we're seeing that through the brands that are being developed, where we're seeing. Yes, there's a lot of activity in the luxury and the upper upscale and the full service scale, but we're seeing a lot of activity in mid-scale hotel brands. We have our Godwin brand, Tempo, brands like this which are working very well in this sector. Yeah. But still that potential to unlock is really there. And if you sat through the sessions this morning, there's so much expertise in the room, we don't need to reinvent it. There's so many good lessons that can be learned.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think that's the real opportunity is unlocking that African market, whether it's in the mid-scale and in particularly regional rollouts, platforms. This is what's going to be sort of key. But beyond the sort of domestic and regional market, as a destination, right? And we heard on the panel before, just the uniqueness of what Africa has, and as a global sort of player across tourism and hospitality, what is your role in exposing people to this unique destination that we have, and how do you do that through your sort of various channels, etc., and the role that global multinational companies like yourselves play?
That's really an important balance to achieve in any destination. And if you lift up for a moment and you talk destination first without segregating between global brands and local operators, I think getting that balance right between what is really relevant from a local perspective, what is really relevant from a regional, conservation, there are niche operators here which have an absolute fundamental role to play in developing the destination, but it also can't be out of balance. What the global operators bring, and which is fundamental to investors, is rate. Because while domestic travel carries a lot of weight and it's an important sector, in many, many cases, and I think South Africa is a good example, it doesn't carry the weight of rate in the same way that an international traveler does. So getting that blend right between the presence of global operators or the weight of global operators in the market, because you are exposing that destination to, in our case, 218 million members of our loyalty program, at our colleagues from some of the other brands. If you're not networked, that's probably 500 million to 800 million members around the world. If you're not exposed to that market, then you are also just lacking visibility. So getting that rate balance through that balance between what a global operator brings, because international travel, it will serve domestic, but it will bring a stronger component to international travel, which is higher rated, brings up also regional players, and it creates a stronger financial environment around a market. Everybody benefits.
And do you think the global traveler of today is more open-minded, more sort of experiential focused, and I guess more sort of open to sort of Africa as a destination?
Fundamentally, yes. And I think you referenced it lightly. If you look at some of the pushback in some of the other destinations where there's actually a pushback against tourism in some of these.
I think we're going to see this in a big way in the next few years.
This is a very big opportunity as we see it for emerging tourism destinations to redistribute some of that demand. And first movers will have an amazing opportunity to capitalize on it. But you need that balance. They need to be able to plug into global hotel
Sure.
networks, combine that with regional expertise, and
Sure.
you've got a healthy destination.
And I think that's important that we are developing destinations that are balanced, right?
Yes.
Eco, focused on conservation, niche destinations are one aspect, but bigger, larger resorts can play a role. Urban city destinations are also key. We have to broaden the basket, I guess, of offering from Africa beyond just really a homogenous kind of perspective, right?
Yes. And there are many markets where that balance is not there.
Yeah. I think linked to that and conservation, obviously, is a broader sustainability topic. And see, we can't sort of stress how important that is,
Yes.
right? But I think in an African context, why is the conservation side absolutely, but we've got this huge emerging population, which we've got challenges around poverty and social challenges, that investment in tourism, like you said, has a huge multiplier effect, right? The role of sort of operators, global hotel operators like yourselves, I mean, how do you sort of see that responsibility and the work that has to go into making sure that your owners and your contribution is sustainable and really sort of making an impact in the region?
Honestly, it's a fundamental way, part of how we operate, you know,
Yep.
and I'm not just saying that because it's
Sure.
now fashionable to say so. You know, we've been doing this for 100 years, you
Yeah.
know, across the world, and it's something that we're good at. So at a high level, I mean, that what we call travel with purpose and our community promise, which is how we engage with communities beyond just sort of greenifying or putting the tick, but how we genuinely contribute to sustainable practice, how we genuinely engage with communities. That's a fundamental part of our DNA as a company. It's a fundamental part of how we operate. Our teams are incentivized and bonused on travel with purpose and customer and community promise in the same way they are around financial KPIs. So it really is integral to the part of how we operate. So at a macro level, it's just the DNA of how we operate as a company. And I think anybody today who doesn't look at business through the lens of sustainability is absolutely going to be left behind. So at a macro level, it's incredibly important to how we operate and how we engage and develop our assets in communities. And at a micro level, and I think our latest offering here in Cape Town is an amazing example. The Canopy by Hilton at Longkloof in Cape Town. Our restaurant there, Ongetem with Bertus Passon, amazing example. There's not a single item on that menu which is not locally grown, locally sourced, locally made. Zero.
Absolutely.
You know, and that is a great example of how global meets local and delivers in that clearly sustainable manner.
No, fantastic. And I think just, I guess, in closing, thank you. And I mean, it's fantastic to see so many South Africans and Africans growing globally and doing well within the sector. And I think that's important because, you know, it's a sector that's part of our DNA. We're hospitable people. It's the culture and spirit of Ubuntu that makes it sort of just such an important sector for us. So great to have you here, and thanks for sharing some of these lessons.
Thank you so much. We've talked about Africa's potential for so long, it's time to realize it.
Absolutely.
Thank
Good.
you.
Thank you, everyone.